Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Combat Zone. I'm Nick. He's Joseph. And this is the place where the enemy only has four, count them, four things to say. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender. Not necessarily always in that order, but it works. That's what they do. All right. For those of you who didn't catch last week's show, we have a new format. We are now going to run an hour, but we're going to break the show up into 15-minute segments. I'm going to get 2, and Joseph's going to get 2. And since I brought the show on tonight, I'm going to let Joseph lead with the topic that's got him on fire. Take it away.
Not as much on fire as you just before the show. I mean, I was worried, guys, because, you know, Nick is so angry at whoever he's Facebooking with. He's just pounding and pounding away at his computer.
I'm not angry. I'm passionate. There's a difference.
Passionate. Yeah, Nick is on fire for sure.
You can see my head smoldering in the darkness.
More on fire than I am. But I try not to be on fire. I like to take these things one little bit at a time, Nick.
Well, it's good. You know what? You're in a nice balance because I tend to glow in the dark when I get wound up.
Okay, so Statistics Canada releases a report today analyzing the market effect of cannabis, that is to say marijuana legalization in Canada in the first 6 months of 2019. And what they have found is very interesting. They surveyed 572 marijuana users. They discovered that the price of illegal, that is to say not regulated, not government-sanctioned marijuana in the first 6 months of this year, 2019, went from approximately a price of $6.23 per gram to $5.93 a gram. Now, that's not a very big price difference, okay? The price fell, but the illegal stuff is getting cheaper.
Yeah.
On the other hand, legal cannabis, that is to say government regulated, was selling at the beginning of the 6 months for $10.21 per gram, and it went from that to $10.65 per gram. So the price gap between legal and illegal marijuana is now $4.72 a gram. Again, these are approximate numbers, but I don't think anybody can argue or anybody's going to take issue with the fact that legal marijuana is now a little bit more than twice the price of illegal marijuana. So what's the upshot? Well, the upshot is that of all of the people who were surveyed, 59% say that they're buying illegal marijuana because it's cheaper. Now, is there anyone out there that's surprised by this? You know, you have the licensing, you have the taxation, you have the regulation having to produce the marijuana in a certain way. And, you know, it's interesting that we're talking about producing, gosh, I'm going to sound like I'm in favor of legalized marijuana, which I'm not. But it's an interesting case study because setting aside the price of that, the question of regulation, why do we have regulation? Well, we have regulation because we want to make sure that people are, you know, their safety is
assured,
into consideration. They're not being poisoned. They're not getting, I want to say they're not getting sick. Of course they're getting sick by using this stuff, but let's set that aside for a second, okay? They're not dying from other kinds of infections or anything. They're not being sick because the stuff is contaminated with other things, okay? But here's the question I have for you, Nick. Was anybody getting sick beforehand? So is this a case of a completely, utterly irrelevant government regulation driving the price up of this product and, in fact, driving people because the price is going down? And this is what inevitably happens with this stuff. The black market price actually goes down, and that's why it's on the black market, because it's easier to get. It's like cigarettes, right?
Right.
And interestingly enough, because it's illegal marijuana, all of the people that you wanted to drive out of business are still doing this, but they're doing it at a reduced price because market forces you cannot escape no matter how dogmatic you are, no matter how much you predict and manipulate. The fact is, all you can do is interfere in the market. You can't control the market.
Well, first of all, remember how this was marketed to us in the first place. When the government came out and said, look, we want to keep this out of the hands of kids. So we're going to take control of the marijuana market, and we're going to make sure it's safe, and that you just like buying liquor. And how effective is that at keeping the booze out of the hands of kids? So that was warning number one. As Ronald Reagan famously said, the most terrifying sentence in the English language is, "Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
Right. 9 words.
That's right. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language.
I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
That's right. And this is a classic case of that. So now, because of the regulations imposed, they've made it more difficult. They've reduced access, which drives up price, because supply and demand dictates the more supply there is, the lower the price there is. So if you restrict access, there's not as much supply. So now the price goes up. On top of that, you have all the regulations and all the registration and the business licenses and all that nonsense. This is supposed to be a huge cash cow for the government. And yet all it's done is drive the price on the black market down, and people are now going, why would I pay $10 for what we used to call a nickel dime or a dime bag back when I was in the 70s, when I did try it once in a while back then. But the point is that, for that quantity, for what, grams or whatever, for the same amount, I'm paying twice as much at the government store. I'm going back to my dealer in the corner, because he's only getting, instead of $10, he's going to charge me $5.
So the next step here is that the government that wanted to do away with all of this stuff about law enforcement around this terribly, this totally benign, allegedly drug. So we're going to save money. But of course, now they're going to have to spend that money chasing after the illegal traffickers, not because it's a harmful drug. The reason that they're going to do it now is because they're in competition with these guys. We have Gang A, Gang B, and then we have Gang C, the government. And the government is going to now push law enforcement into controlling the illegal trade. But, the whole thing was cockeyed in the first place. It's utter nonsense that you take away the criminal element by legalizing something and regulating it, okay?
Well, as you pointed out, we still have a legal drug problem with things like fentanyl.
Right.
There's prescription drugs that are being stolen all the time and sold in the black market.
Well, anybody who understands this knows, Nick, that there is a huge, in fact, probably the bigger trade in drugs is the illegal trade in legal drugs, prescription drugs. There's a lesson here to be learned about what would happen if we legalized and regulated prostitution. The ladies who get into prostitution and have their medical certificates, they have their licenses, they're working in licensed, taxed establishments.
Brothels.
They're going to be fine, but the price is going to go up, and there's going to be a black market for unregulated, unlicensed prostitution. And guess who's going to be the unlicensed prostitute? It's going to be the most vulnerable ones, the underage, the sick, the people who can't get licenses, the people who can't get into the regulated part of the industry. And they're going to be very vulnerable. They're going to be the most vulnerable. They're going to be preyed upon. They're going to be charging far less than what the market in legal prostitution is. So I think it's an important object lesson here. Do not go down that road.
Well, tragically, they probably won't listen. And if we reelect this particular...
Whoever listens to us, Nick.
Well...
Other than our listeners.
Yeah, well, we have the smartest listeners on the internet. But anyway, the whole thing, whether it's pot or this is what happens when government rules from on high without having their feet on the ground. And you see this kind of thing. Take well, I guess pot's about the best example. Can you imagine that the thing that keeps coming to my mind is only the government could lose money selling marijuana, and they will lose money. There's no doubt about it, because Never mind chasing after the little corner guy, the dealer that at the hot dog stand sell it in between the halves of the newspaper, but or driving around his car selling it, however he does it. But what about those shop dealers, people who own legitimate shops and all the paperwork? If their paperwork isn't right, they're going to have bylaw enforcement go in and make sure. So they're going to have to hire more, that everything's up to snuff. They're going to have to make sure that they hire more people to do these inspections to go around. Now, right now, the number's small. There's 10 stores in the province?
Well, because it's only a matter of time before legal dealers start to sell illegal drugs, just like not counterfeit cigarettes, but contraband cigarettes. Okay.
Yeah.
Contraband. So it's only a matter of time before, the legal shops start to sell contraband marijuana, because it's going to be cheaper. Okay.
Well, they have to compete. If they're in business, they have to keep their doors open. And look, whether you like the idea or not, that's not the point. The point is now you've created a whole new level of bureaucracy that we have to pay for, and the funds generated by the taxes gathered on the legal sale of pot are not going to cover it.
I don't know. Maybe they will. All I'm saying is it's just another government boondoggle. Sure.
It is that. And that's the end of round one. Okay. Round two. There is a lot of conversation lately around what's going on with Lisa MacLeod. Now, Lisa MacLeod and I have had our differences, but I was doing some reading about it today, and the question I posed on my Facebook page for the Combat Zone was, is this the sign of an arrogant minister out of control who thinks she's untouchable? Or is this a double standard for conservative women being imposed by the media? Take as an example the story about the autistic changes to autistic funding for families in Ontario. There was a huge backlash over that. The whole thing was a schmozzle. But the one question that no reporter that I saw asked about that whole thing was, is this a real grassroots protest by just really angry parents who have a legitimate case against the government? Look, when it comes to things like autism, I don't mind if the government spends my tax dollars helping those families. I'm not dead set against any kind of social safety net. I know what it's like to take care of somebody who's got a long-term disability or a long-term issue that's an expensive thing to deal with. So I don't have a problem with that. But what I wonder is it possible that at least some of this was staged by people who have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo? You see it from the teachers' unions all the time, where they use kids as pawns to go out and promote everything from climate change to don't vote Tory. And it's just, to me, it's outrageous. Now, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, because nobody ever asked the question and then followed up on it. Nobody ever said, well, what's really going on here? And dug deep below the surface to find out whether or not there was more to this movement, because there's always more to the story than the headline tells you. And even sometimes when you read the body of the story, you're only getting the surface. It's only as good as the reporter who wrote it. And if they're lazy and they just have to hit a deadline, they'll just do the easy, pick the low-hanging fruit and file that, and that's what'll be in the paper. And I think there's a lot of lazy journalists out there. I've known some really good ones, and I've known some ones that are questionable at best. So I just thought it was, when I'm watching this story unfold with Lisa blowing up at Eugene Melnyk, if that's an isolated case, it's way over the top. It's just absolutely arrogant for Lisa to behave that way. But people don't live in a vacuum. You don't just have one thing happen all by itself. It never is that way. So what was it? What was the catalyst for that outburst? And nobody ever, because I'm not the only one to think of this. Anybody who's got half a brain would say, well, wait a minute, what's really going on here? Instead of going, oh, that terrible Lisa MacLeod, how dare she talk that way? Well, on one level, you'd be right. But you have to ask yourself, why would a seasoned politician like Lisa, this is not her first rodeo. She's been elected, I think the first time was in 2001. So she's been around the block a few times in political circles and held many different offices. She's not stupid. To blow up publicly like that at somebody as high profile as Eugene Melnyk is really, really dumb. And I don't think she's really, really dumb. I just think there's something going on here, and they didn't push to find out what it was. And that's what's making me crazy about this, because I don't have any problem nailing somebody's hide to the wall when they misbehave. But I want to make sure I'm right when I do it. And I don't think that was done in this case at all.
Sorry, that was me coughing in the background.
That's why I gave him the pause.
For those of you who don't know, by the way, Lisa MacLeod is a politician. She's a local politician here in Ottawa. She's our provincial representative. Well, she's one of the provincial representatives here in the Ottawa area. She happens to be mine, and she is currently the Minister of Sport and Fitness or Tourism. I can't remember the exact title. Look, I think that Lisa's having some difficulty. I'm not going to pile on. Clearly something happened. Everything that you've said, Nick, I think is true. It's already a tough job being a politician, being a minister, and being subjected these days to the kind of, not just the kind of scrutiny, but the kind of gotcha politics, and we're going to get into that a little later on in the show, that public figures are subjected to today. It's tough, and it's no secret that Lisa herself has talked about some of her, from time to time over the years, her emotional struggles.
Right.
She's been very upfront about that. And I think, good for her for doing it. And when she came forward and talked this way, even then, people were criticizing her and saying, oh, you're just saying that because you want to have some sort of a political benefit from it. Look, she's a decent person under a whole lot of stress. Did she act or speak inappropriately? I think that if you ask her, she'll be the first person to say, yes, for sure she did. Did she handle it well? Well, she probably could have handled it better.
Right.
Having said that, I think it's just important to give her a bit of a break now.
This is why I ask about the double standard as well, not just the fact that reporters were satisfied with the low-hanging fruit. When you look at the cartoon of her in a straitjacket.
Oh, yeah, I think that cartoon is completely inappropriate.
No kidding.
I think it's awful. It's this gotcha journalism where journalists they're just so smug. They don't really care anymore about just being decent. It's like we've thrown out our sense of decency. And, I'm speaking here from the right. Honestly, we're not immune to any of this either. I see it on our side too, but I see it far more on the left than I see it on the right.
Yeah.
And I see it far more in journalism. Journalism used to be a profession that was an honorable profession. It's not anymore. Everybody could be a journalist. Everybody can have their own blog. So much of what I see as journalism, I'm talking to people who are recognized, who are
accredited journalists,
accredited or consider themselves to be real journalists. The public considers them to be real journalists, and I don't even see real journalism amongst so many of these people. Somebody will come up with a story, and all of a sudden, everybody else is reporting the same story the same way. There's nothing original. There's nothing unique. They're all a bunch of followers, okay? It's like an echo chamber. But that's a separate problem, perhaps, from what we're talking about with Lisa MacLeod here.
Well, it speaks to the double. First of all, it does kind of touch on this double standard. Because, look, I don't think there's a paper in the country that would have said that was fair game. Let's take Climate Barbie as an example. Look how upset she gets and how people, on the progressives flock to her defense when she gets called a simple name, Climate Barbie, because of the role that she plays and the intelligence that she exudes. My attitude is if you're in public office and you want to be taken seriously, you better have a skin as thick as a rhino. But when you run up the white flag and say, listen, I'm struggling with emotional or mental challenges and issues that are making this difficult. People don't say that out loud on purpose for self-glorification. There's a stigma around it. And there's been a lot of effort put in to stepping away from trying to get rid of that stigma so people will come forward. So when we have a political woman does that, she comes forward and says, okay, I have these struggles. I'm dealing with this. Instead of rallying around her progressive sisters beat her with a club. Where are the left-wing writers saying, well, we're so proud of Lisa for stepping forward and trying to dispel this stigmatism around mental health? they're some of the worst. Some of the worst criticisms are coming from female. If this whole Twitter thing about how terrible a mother she is came from another woman. And it's just like, oh my good Lord, this is a cat fight on like the kind you've never seen before. It's not a wonder so many people are saying, you know, in a different time or a different place, I might consider running for public office. But if this is what I got to put up with, I am not going anywhere near it. And we lose a lot of good people every year because they do not want that kind of pressure. They don't want that kind of examination, and they don't want to be held to a clear double standard. And it hurts all of us when that happens.
I agree. It is a problem, Nick. It's for sure. It drives away good, decent people.
It does.
From taking on the role of an elected politician, somebody who is going to put their name forward. And, you know, again, you know, I mentioned about journalism being an honorable profession. I was raised in the belief that you give something back to your community when you get a little older, a little bit of experience under your belt. And if you serve in elected office, that's a decent thing to do. It's an honorable thing to do.
Right.
Irrespective of whatever your political philosophy is, are you on the right or are you on the left or whatever it is, at least you're giving back to your community.
That's right.
It used to mean something, Nick. Now it's open warfare. If Lisa MacLeod had some difficulty, she was under stress, she overreacted, she on a particular thing. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what went on. It's always important to ask yourself what was going on with a person on that day when they have an episode like this. I think that people should give her the benefit of the doubt. I think that people should give her a break. We
can all have bad days.
Exactly.
All of us do have bad days.
You're exactly right. People have to just chill out a little bit and,
accept the fact that she's a human being. Like, look, there's no secret that I do not like Justin Trudeau. I do not like him. I do not like his politics. I do not like what he stands for. But whenever I go after him, it's on his political stance. I personally couldn't care what he does behind closed doors. You know, how he raises his family, how he relates to his wife. None of that's any of my business. And there is a very clear line in my mind about what's acceptable and what isn't. And one thing you never do is go after somebody's family like they did with Lisa and her daughter. This whole thing on Twitter. Okay. And it's not the first time. They've crossed a line here, and there is not only no recognition of crossing that line, I'm beginning to think they don't even think that line exists. And it really does hurt all of us because it makes journalism shoddy and unseemly, and talk about driving people away from what used to be honored profession. That's another one, not just politics, but the covering of it. Because who wants to jump into that mud hole? That's round 2.
Okay, so we'll be back in a few minutes here in the Combat Zone on thinkradio.ca. Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone. I'm Joe. He's Nick.
I am.
And I just opened the wrong window here on my computer. So last week, Abacus did some polling, and one of the questions that they were looking at was the level of education of voters. And they came up with some interesting stuff that some people are talking about like it's new. It's not new. I've seen this polling before. And that is that, generally speaking, people who are more educated, and I'm using that term loosely, I'll get into my take on this in a minute, but let's just say people who have a higher level of education tend to vote left, that is to say liberal, and people who have a lower level of education, quote unquote, there's my air quotes, tend to vote conservative. And so this Ottawa professor, a professor at the University of Ottawa, got into a bit of a kerfuffle on Twitter. His name was Amir Ataran, and the tweet he put out was, Conservative have a strong lead among those who have not attended college or university. True. While Liberals have a lead among those with university education. Also true. Then he got into a little bit of trouble with his conclusion. The party of the uneducated, every poll says this. That ignited a bit of a firestorm because he seemed to be suggesting, and I think he probably was suggesting, maybe not that conservative voters are more stupid, but more ignorant, less worldly, etc. So that was Professor Attaran's take on this particular issue. Now, it's important to understand, as I said, Nick, this is not new. I've seen this before. I've seen plenty of polling that confirms this. This is not a new poll. It's not a new subject. But my take on this is, I think, fundamentally different. I would say that it's not so much educated versus uneducated. Given the state of our education system today, particularly post-secondary education, I would say that this is more a case of indoctrinated versus unindoctrinated.
That's a very good way to put it.
Okay. Not educated versus uneducated. And by the way, to Professor Attaran, I know a whole lot of people with advanced degrees who are not very, how do I put this? They're not really that worldly. They like to think they are. They've been told they are.
Right.
They don't really have a whole lot of understanding of how the world works. I don't want to say that they're stupid. I mean, that's not my point, okay? I sounded a little sarcastic there. I didn't mean it to be. I'm just saying that just because you have an advanced degree or any degree doesn't really mean that you're educated, at least not in the way that I suspect that Professor Attaran is suggesting.
Well, first of all, I think it's an incredibly arrogant thing to say. Secondly, I know a lot of people who have been educated into imbecility. You just look at some of the products of universities and colleges around here and give them a basic geography test. You know, they can ream off all kinds of political science nonsense. There's been a lot of people would agree with the statement that our children have been taught how to hug a tree and recycle a can, but can't add, read, or write. And if you doubt me, just take a look through any list of advertisements and look at the quality of the writing and the editing that goes into it. Now, a lot of people say, that's just tech speak. No, you know what? How you present yourself in social media, it's like first impressions, right? When you meet someone new the first time, how they look tells you a lot or gives you that impression of what kind of person they are. So when you go on Facebook, when you go on Twitter, when you go on Kijiji and you post an ad or you read one, the way that is set up reflects a lot about the person. At least to you, it tells you a lot about the individual. You might be right, you might be wrong, but first impressions are very hard to shake. So when you have these kids walking around, you know, who know all kinds of things that really don't matter in the greater scheme of things. Now, I'm being pretty broad in my statements. I get that. But at the same time, when you've got people, and how many times have we seen it? The classic show is The Dumb American, right? Well, it's not just a dumb American. You can do that on any Canadian campus and come up with the same kind of footage. These kids just don't know anything. They just don't know. Ask them, where's Vienna? They have no idea.
And this is a general problem. This isn't just a Canadian problem.
No, but
I'm glad you mentioned Vienna because.
Well, I'm taking world geography. Like, where's the Panama Canal? Who held the lease on it for 99 years? Only one of the most strategically important waterways in the world. You should at least know where it is and who owned it for a while.
Right. Where's the Persian Gulf?
Where's the Persian Gulf? Why does it matter? Where's the Strait of Hormuz? Because that's all in the news today. There's nothing new. There's nothing. This is ancient history. It's happening right now and affects your life. So when this guy comes out, this professor comes out and says, well, conservatives are stupid, which is what I read that to mean. What he's really saying is they don't have the kind of education I like. They don't vote because if they voted the way he wanted them to, they'd be, oh boy, these are enlightened people.
Again, I think it's important to understand when I talk about education, I'm talking about knowledge. I don't care what your degree is. If you're an educated person, it's because you have knowledge. When he's talking about education, he's not talking knowledge. He's talking about level or certification.
Degrees
or whatever,
behind glass on a wall.
And he's trying to equate both of these. And a lot of people make this mistake. Now, Marin asked a question on the webpage about when the statistics were taken. The polling was published last week. So the survey was very, very recent. It's only the data is only a couple of weeks old. Now, Marin mentions that there are a lot of educated people who are conservatives, and that is absolutely true. But the polling data that shows that people who have higher degrees tend to vote more liberal, that's true. Now, here's where I think you have to also be very careful, and that is what area you're talking about in terms of education. Because the polling that I have seen, and again, there is plenty of polling on this, people with degrees or advanced education in the sciences, in engineering, in the things that are actually real world.
Yeah, based in the real world.
Okay. I don't want to say that they tend to vote conservative, but they vote conservative in larger numbers than liberal arts programs. English, philosophy, teaching, psychology, etc.
There's also a difference between education and wisdom. And here's a quick little funny story to give you an example. A guy in a big Cadillac pulled into a farmer's driveway. The farmer was just leaning against his shovel, looking out down the fence row and staring at a turtle on a fence post. Well, the guy walked over. All he wanted was directions, but he got curious. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "That's a fence post turtle." He says, "A fence post turtle?" He said, "Yeah, it's just like a politician." So what do you mean? He said, "Well, he's got no idea how he got there, no idea what he's doing, and no idea how he's going to get down." And that's the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Like, the farmer may not be very educated, but he certainly can size up the situation pretty accurately very quickly. And I think that conservatives, let's call them the blue-collar crowd, have a lot of wisdom, even if they don't have a lot of higher learning. And when I said earlier that a lot of people have been educated into imbecility, it's because they don't stop. They don't have the experience in life yet to be able to distill from what they're being taught what's true and what isn't.
Right.
And they just buy the whole package and swallow it.
But I think it's important also, again, I just want to go back to this, Nick. I think it's really important to understand that there is a significant difference in voting patterns between people who have higher education in the hard sciences and engineering and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but the people in that class would be the same as the farmer because they're based in the real world. Their sciences are drawn from real world experience.
But this is it. The opportunity for indoctrination, for this, squishy, woolly-headed sort of theorizing doesn't exist in something like engineering or something like architecture. It's math. Black and white. The type of education that people are getting in education, teaching, liberal arts, that's the area where you have problems. Now, we have so many people in these areas of education and university and colleges today, far more people in liberal arts than we have in what I like to call the hard sciences.
Yeah, the STEM courses.
And so the results end up being skewed. If you really want to look at this and get a true picture, you have to do more than just ask a person what level of education, which is a standard question, by the way, in polling. You have to ask people what area of education have they gotten their degree in. I think that's very important. Okay, on to the next topic.
Yeah, because we're running a little over time here. The one I want to bring up for my last topic for tonight, can you hold a politician accountable for the views of people who attend a public event and then rush up and say, "Can we get our picture with you?" Maxime Bernier was out in Calgary at the Calgary Stampede. Now, the Toronto Star has a story, and I'm looking at it right here, where he's standing in front of three guys and looks like a little boy. They're all, giving thumbs up and having their picture taken with a national political leader. And no matter what you think of the People's Party, Maxime Bernier is a national leader. And a lot of people like what he stands for. So it turns out that there's a group called the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which is, how do I put this delicately, hard left. Okay, when I was looking at some of the people involved in that, I did a little homework on this group, and I'm not going to get into too much about them. I really don't care what their opinion is. I take their opinion with a huge block of salt. Okay, because anytime you see a group that says anti-hate in it, it's going to be on the left-hand side of the spectrum. That's just been my experience since this whole anti-hate nonsense got started about 10 years ago. So they said he's associating with known white supremacist and neo-Nazi fascists, as if they know what the heck those terms mean. So anyway, Maxine's people came out and said, we have no idea who these people are. Politicians have people walk up to them at public events asking for pictures all the time. And I don't think Maxine could have known. He didn't know them. You take any event, go to the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto. Hundreds of thousands of people. A politician walks down there. No matter what flavor he or she is, whether it be orange, red, blue, or green, if they stand there long enough, somebody's going to come up, oh boy, we love your policies. Can you take, and can we take our picture with you? Do you think they're going to stop and say, well, wait a minute, how'd you vote last time? What's your view on? Before I can no, they're going to go, of course. And, because they want to shake hands, kiss babies, and that kind of stuff. They're trying to raise their profile. So for this group to come out and knock Maxime Bernier for this, it's just plain dumb. It's just an example of how they want to control the conversation, and they want to slap down anybody under any excuse. It's the gotcha politics you were referring to before.
And that's exactly why I used the term and said, we'd be getting into this a little bit. It is. That's exactly what it is. It's gotcha politics. There's no context. There's no attempt to determine context. I don't know what the situation was. I don't know why Maxime posed with these guys. I think it's probably exactly what you said. Some guy comes over, you don't analyze and look and say, what is that badge? I'm not going to take a picture with you. The fact is, I don't think that Maxime even looked at it. I've been in enough of these situations myself with public figures where they're just mobbed by people that want to have their picture taken with them. It's as simple as that. So
it's not like these guys were wearing swastikas on their arms and giving the Nazi salute.
So on this one, I give Maxime a break also. I give him a pass.
This is what's so frustrating, though, because it happens all the time. And both sides are guilty. This is the gotcha politics is what runs politics these days.
Although I will say this, Nick, while I don't like gotcha politics, I do agree with you that it's practiced on both sides, but I think the left does it more.
Yeah,
that's number one.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And number two, I think there's a real double standard here, because when was the last time that you saw a Justin Trudeau posing with somebody who was, a hard leftist, perhaps even a member of the Communist Party?
Or had links to Islamic terrorism.
Or whatever. You don't see the press going after him the way that the people went after Maxime Bernier on this. So there's clearly a double standard here as well. But double standard or not, I don't think it's appropriate for the journalists, for anybody, to look at a picture like this and say, Maxime, you are a bad person. Your party is full of racists because there happened to be this picture. And in fairness, even I'm saying this as if the people in this picture are actually racist. I don't know. I don't know what group they belong to or if they belong to any group. We're all talking here about the narrative that's been put out there by these people who have absolutely no reason to support Maxime Bernier and every reason to be against him. And some of the people in the group that you said this network are liberal activists.
Yep.
Some of them are liberal activists. So I'm not going to name names, but I know some of them from my work in political circles. But look, let me tell you this, Nick. I think that the guy who had probably the best quote that I ever heard on this topic was Preston Manning. There are lots of things that Preston Manning and I would not see eye to eye on. There are lots of things that we would see eye to eye on. But when he was the leader of the Reform Party, a new political party, somewhat right-wing, it tended to attract people from some of these groups who were looking for a mainstream political home until the party weeded them out. Preston Manning had the best response to this kind of gotcha politic. He said that when you have a bright light, it attracts a lot of bugs.
Ain't that the truth?
And I think he was spot on with that.
Well, they asked Trump the same thing. He was had his picture taken with some unseemly character, and said a reporter asked him, "How do you feel about being endorsed by XYZ group?" And he says, "Well, you notice I didn't endorse them." And I think that's probably the best mindset It might not be the best quote, but it certainly is the best mindset. It's the same thing that Preston Manning was saying. I can't control who comes up to me at an event. I'm not there to filter people. I'm there to meet them. And I have my own core beliefs. I am not going to change them just because you don't happen to like this particular group, just because they showed up at an event and asked to have a picture taken with me and I had no idea who they were. That's not how this works. So it's the same thing that Maxime Bernier now faces or has faced, and he's being put on the hot seat over something he had no control over. Who knows how many pictures of Maxime Bernier were taken that day? It's like the old story about Robert Stanfield and the football. You told me that story.
The famous
football fumble.
Somebody threw him a football in the
he dropped it
on the tarmac, and he dropped the ball.
Yeah,
he didn't catch it. But what the reporters never showed was the 15 or 20 passes just before this one that he caught.
That's right.
This happened to be the one that he didn't catch, and that became the story, right?
That's right.
So, sure.
Like I had an old engineering friend tell me one time, he said, they don't remember you for the 19 bridges you build that don't fall down. They just remember you for the one that did.
Now, AJ asks an interesting question, again, on the website. How soon until we see groups dispatch members to meet leaders in an attempt to torpedo their election? That's a really great question, and here's the answer. They already do.
I was going to say the same thing.
They already do. They plant rogue people. They get them to go to these meetings to ask embarrassing questions. They're already doing it. Now, I don't think that the people that Maxime was taking a picture with, if indeed they are racist, and notice how I didn't say right-wing racist.
Yeah, racist come in every...
Racist. It's not right-wing racist, okay? I mean, I know right-wing racists. I know left-wing racists. I mean, racism is racism. It's not right-wing or left-wing. So if these guys are racists, if they're neo-Nazis, talking about poor education, that's a term I really hate because, when I look at the people who are accused of being Nazis today, I mean, they're unsavory people with really sometimes despicable points of view.
Right.
But to call them Nazis is to really diminish what the National Socialist movement in Germany was all about. These guys are not Nazis, okay? They're idiots. That's what they are. But I don't see that these guys would necessarily pose with Maxime Bernier thinking, okay, yeah, we're going to get him. We're going to make sure that he can't get elected. I think that they genuinely wanted a picture of themselves with him. Look, and maybe they want to belong to his party. But I will tell you, I know of many circumstances where left-wing activists will go and pose as provocateurs. Not pose, they are provocateurs. They'll pose as
supporters,
racists or unsavory characters.
Oh, I see what you mean.
In an effort to create the kind of story that we've seen here. Sure,
yeah.
Happens already, AJ.
You got that right. And it's the sad thing is the Calgary Stampede's a big party. Everybody there is in a good mood. They're having fun. And you kind of let your guard down a little bit. And you just, when there's that many people, hundreds of thousands of people attend that event every year. It's huge.
Sure.
So we're going to crucify him over one picture? I don't think so. Like, I don't know how well Maxine will do in the upcoming election, but he doesn't deserve this.
No, he doesn't. I agree with you, Nick. This is the era we live in, and it's really too bad because, as we both said earlier on, it drives good people away.
It does.
And look, there are a lot of good people in public life, but there are a lot of really poor quality people, not really qualified to be doing what they're doing. And by qualified, I don't mean that they have a particular certification. There is no litmus test, but I know lots of people who get into politics because they can't get a job anywhere. And I'm not exaggerating. That's literally, they can't get a job anywhere. So I'll run for office. I'll run for city council. And I'll make my $60,000 or $70,000 a year. And it's not hard to get elected to city council. And they wouldn't be able to get a job anywhere else. They don't have the skill sets. And I see that more and more and more and more in the political field.
Well, you can tell by the caliber of the councillor you end up with after an election.
And not just municipal politics. I mean, right across the board.
Fine. Yeah, you're right.
There are a lot of people who have been elected that don't have the skill and the experience to be able to deal with the problems that they want to deal with. It can really be very disheartening.
It certainly can. And you know what? That's an hour.
Boy, it really passes fast.
Yeah,
well, we're going to do this again a couple of more weeks, I think, before we make a final decision if we're going to stick with this format.
Well,
I'm not really sure. Nick?
Marin, I think, made a point. She liked the 2-hour show. It was more relaxed. And yeah, it is.
It for
but
sure
at the
is.
same time, it does make it easier for people who need to get up in the morning, who are in our time zone, or in earlier time zones out east, to catch the show live because it's only an hour long. And it also forces us to be more succinct with what we want to talk about.
Well, I don't know about succinct. I think I'm feeling that this is a kind of a really frenetic.
Frenetic.
Yeah, not frantic, but frenetic. Look that up, guys. Look that up.
My word of the day is succinct and yours is frenetic.
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 Okay. Listen, don't forget to catch.
Sorry. I threw him off his groove, man.
Tom Harris, Exploratory Journeys. It's on the website now if you want to listen to the podcast. He was live at 8:00. A great interview on climate change with
he has some great guests.
Sterling Burnett. And I mean, he's sort of telegraphed what guests he's going to have in the future. If you go back to episode 1 and replay that, or if you haven't listened to it, but I got to tell you, I've seen the list of guests that he's got lined up, and it's a real privilege and a pleasure to have him on board here at Think Radio. And so if you haven't caught any of his podcasts, please do. If you have been listening to the other ones, make sure you download and listen to, or just stream it on the website, Exploratory Journeys with Tom Harris, episode number 3. And Nick, that's it for us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, God bless. We'll catch you again next week here in the Combat Zone.